Welcome to the first Planning Advisory Service podcast. My name is Richard and I'm going to run through our briefing for councillors on the localism bill and some of our thoughts about what it means for planning, and especially for councillors. I'm going to try and get through this presentation in a few minutes, but usually when doing this to a room full of people, you can easily take much longer. Many of these ideas and principles are really quite new and can prompt extended discussions. This presentation has three parts. The health warnings are a bit more explicit than usual because our understanding of the localism bill is still evolving. I'll then take you through some thoughts and conclusions from our take at the Planning Advisory Service, starting with an overview of decentralisation, then going through the big picture of planning reform before focusing on neighbourhood plans. Then I'll summarise what this means for councils and councillors right now. If I were doing this presentation for real, I'd broaden this right out to discuss how far and how fast it suits your local authority to go into this area. So, to begin with the health warnings, the first point is that we're discussing a bill, not an act. It will change as it goes through the Houses of Parliament. This presentation is dated the 24th of January. If it goes down well, we may reissue it when it needs to be updated, as we learn and understand the implications of the bill better. The localism bill is massive and covers many aspects of local government, but for now, we're mainly going to look at the neighbourhood planning parts of it. If you want to know a bit more, there's a useful plain English guide published recently by CLG. You might also be interested in the response to the bill from the LGA. In particular, there is an issue about waste planning and how fines from Europe may, or may not, be payable by local authorities. It's worth paying attention to the discussion and also ensuring that your councillors know whether this may affect you. To put this presentation together, I've used some slides from CLG, some feedback from our neighbourhood planning events, some opinions from our recent Leadership Academy for politicians, and a Greg Clark speech. And just because I'm saying what follows, it doesn't make it right. Feel free to challenge my perspective. Localism goes far beyond the existing structures of local government, and my view is probably that of someone who was a product of the existing system. To put some of these ideas in context, here is a slide from CLG that places localism in the broader process of decentralisation of government. I don't think you can begin to understand localism in planning without knowing a bit of this context. I think the first point is telling. The top-down housing figures from the RSS were seen as alienating people. And it's not on the slide, but I think it's also fair to say that a more local approach to planning may also become more proportionate. We can make the process of planning cheaper by involving people more proactively, removing some things from planning altogether, and getting into a more rounded debate about which things are worth spending public money to promote and protect for a particular place. This quote from Greg Clark at the Localist think tank is a neat way of thinking about a new status quo. At present, most people in planning will know that almost all significant developments are fiercely opposed by neighbours. If we just devolve the existing approach, then we can't expect much to change. Instead, the new status quo is about trading influence to neighbourhoods in return for a more pro-development response. This quote is from the same speech, but the emphasis is mine. This is another aspect of decentralisation that makes some planners uneasy. The consequences of planning decisions are not felt equally among people. A decision to restrict housing supply, for example, suits people already on the housing ladder in the short term. It makes their asset more valuable. But it can feel quite different to those who are trying to get on the ladder in the first place. Moreover, the impact of design on place can take many years to manifest itself, and planning can sometimes feel like a series of one-way choices. Not just because demolitions are difficult to undo, but also once something is built in a particular way, it is difficult to change. Some places are already realising that the size and mix of flats has suited the developers in the short term, but reduces the ability of people to live their whole lives in a particular place. If they have a family, they may need to move away, for example. It is also the case that planning is often finely balanced, classically with the economic benefit of development on the one hand, balanced against the change and uncertainty and intensification on the other. These are not straightforward decisions, and it feels unlikely that a community will come down firmly and cleanly on one side or the other. This slide is interesting. It's taken from a CLG presentation on the planning reform agenda. For the first time I can remember, the incentives for development are a piece in the jigsaw. We've had Section 106 contributions for many years that some people perceive as incentives. In fact, they are carefully controlled to solely mitigate the impact of development. This incentive word covers the provision of infrastructure, but also seems to extend to sharing some of the benefits of economic development with neighbourhoods. Planning has enormous cultural sensitivities about backhanders, and yet I've heard several people use the word bribe recently as shorthand for the process of deals being struck between neighbours and developers. It is clearly something that we need to have a sensible debate on, but we must be very careful not to lose the reputation for fairness and honesty that, by and large, planning has achieved over the last decade or two. For this presentation, I'm not going to spend much time talking about the position above and outside councils, except to say that PAS has publicised 2 event series recently. One was larger than local, and the other on neighbourhood planning. It's clear from take-up that people feel much more connected to neighbourhood planning. Someone put it to me that it feels like something they could be sacked for not getting right. But those strategic issues haven't gone away, and every council should have a clear and public vision about the issues it needs to address in a sub-regional way, and an idea of who and how it needs to work to progress them. Again, just as a whiz through, you should note that alongside all this talk of change, some fundamentals remain. We still have a plan-led system, and the benefit of having strategic policies to underpin the choices made is acknowledged. The existing tools, area action plans, etc., remain, and will still be the appropriate tool to use for some places. Other things remain similar, although there's a much sharper focus on money and the use of resources. The Community Infrastructure Levy has survived, Section 106 becomes less important but still relevant for affordable housing, and the New Homes Bonus will be extremely relevant for some places. So, from the PAS perspective, it is important not just to chase the new shiny thing. The local plan remains crucially important, and there is more work to do to ensure we make best use of it. For obvious reasons, we have been focusing on getting core strategies in place, and we need to ensure that once they're in place we understand how to improve, update and use them. Neighbourhood planning needs to be seen in this context as a tool for a particular job. It's for local issues only, and they can't go against the policies in the strategic plan. There also needs to be a sharper divide between the sort of things best addressed in an AAP as opposed to a neighbourhood plan. At the moment, it feels like a product of how much development is proposed, but it may end up being about land ownership, or some other rule of thumb. This is a CLG slide summarising how planning works at this local level, and the outcomes they're trying to bring about. We'll unpick what some of this might mean in the next couple of slides. Other points to remember are that a neighbourhood plan needs to fit in with the authority's strategic policies, with national policies, and with European legislation, particularly the Human Rights Act and SEAs. The authority will be responsible for checking a plan for these latter aspects. They'll have a lighter touch examination to make sure the plan fits with the strategy and other neighbourhood plans. Once these things have happened, it will go to a referendum within the neighbourhood and adjoining areas if they are affected, and if a simple majority of votes are in favour of the authority, once these things have happened, it will go to a referendum within the neighbourhood and adjoining areas if they are affected, and if a simple majority of votes are in favour of it, the authority has to adopt it. So, that a neighbourhood plan becomes a material consideration when determining a planning application. Sometimes a development won't go to committee or require a planning application at all. A neighbourhood plan can simply grant permission directly or via extending permitted development rights. It's also likely that neighbourhood plans will set out design issues, the neighbourhood becoming a more effective consultee, or some other innovations that we don't understand yet. This slide suggests that neighbourhood development orders are contained inside a neighbourhood plan. This won't always be the case, but quite how to make the relationship work between these two documents isn't clear yet. Other key points to remember: that neighbourhood plans need to fit with the authority's strategic policies, with national policies, and with European legislation, particularly the Human Rights Act and SEAs. The authority will be responsible for checking a plan for these aspects. They'll have a light touch examination to make sure the plan fits with the strategy and other neighbourhood plans. Once these things have happened, it will go to a referendum within the neighbourhood and adjoining areas if they are affected, and if a simple majority of votes are in favour, the authority has to accept it. So then, a neighbourhood plan becomes a material consideration when determining a planning application. Some types of development won't get a committee or require a planning application at all. A neighbourhood plan can simply grant permission directly or via extending permitted development rights. It's also likely that neighbourhood plans will set out design issues, the neighbourhood becoming a more effective consultee, and some other innovations we don't understand yet. This slide suggests that neighbourhood development orders are contained inside a neighbourhood plan. This won't always be the case, but quite how to make the relationship work between these documents isn't clear yet. So, a neighbourhood plan is not some kind of wish list or a set of aspirations. It is part of the statutory framework for your place, and you should think of it as being part of the council's plan. It's not clear yet what else the council's role will be. We know that councils will be expected to support and advise, but they don't have to contribute financially, although they can if they want to. This is a CLG slide setting out the overall process of making a neighbourhood plan. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but you will see on the left is the local process. On the right, those aspects that it's sensible to assume the local authority will have a part to play in. How much is a referendum? How many of them will there be? How wide should we cast the net for affected people? I'd suggest that some of these questions miss the point of reduced resources. I think the answer will be, we can have as much referendum as we can afford for £3,000. Interestingly, I've detected a slight difference in opinion between politicians and officers. Most officers are unsure what neighbourhood plans might be used for and are wary of unforeseen consequences. Councillors seem much more comfortable and have already seen some potential. In town centres, you may have many low-value changes of use, adverts, shop fronts, and probably you already have a town centre management group. You can cede all of this planning work to them. You might also use that local knowledge to help ease the implementation on larger schemes. A local tenants group might have more knowledge in how best to phase a development or where the value in the planting scheme is of best long-term use. There is also definite interest in right to build. Clearly the planning part is only one of the hurdles, and it's possible that this change will spark interest in community land trusts. There are many issues still to be worked out. We need to understand the resource implications of helping neighbourhoods to make the plans and defending them against challenge. There are also some tricky questions understanding how you might compare a neighbourhood plan to a strategic plan to understand whether it's appropriate or not. I sense from the politicians that there needs to be an early understanding of how proactive to be. I've heard one suggestion that in non-parish places, ward councillors should lead the way with ward-level plans. If they don't seize the territory, they run the risk of being pulled in many different directions by single-issue groups. In the case of competing proposals for neighbourhood forums, over which the authority has to arbitrate, how are councillors going to help ensure that the fairest and most appropriate decision is made? Someone else suggested that local groups would spontaneously form around real geographies, a GP catchment area, or as a spin-off from the school governing body. How total should coverage be, and how active should councillors be in encouraging neighbourhoods and parishes to do a plan? Will the plans be put to best effect in particular areas, such as where the greatest development pressures are, or where change is needed? Or should there be a hands-off approach? Neighbourhood plans will happen where neighbourhoods want them to. This is really about how proactive local councillors want to be at this level, and this balance needs to be an early and important question for your councillors. Another question to get everyone talking is to explore whether neighbourhood plans are a good sign. Do they indicate an engaged and connected society, happy to play a part in big society, or do they show that local communities feel disconnected and not listened to? The answers to many of these questions may lie somewhere in the middle, but it's helpful to make clear your own thoughts as leaders of the place.